welcome to our panel. And the title for me for this panel, Legends Behind the Comic Books, is exactly appropriate. It's such a great honor for me personally to be in the company of three amazing artists who helped build this industry, starting in the golden age of comics, through the silver age of comics to today, and still be so creatively vital. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing to see. These guys have been my heroes since I was a younger fella. I am such a fan of all of their work, and I'd like to take a moment and introduce them to you. First off is, in the middle, is a gentleman who in the 1940s quickly found himself at a place called Timely Comics, which was to eventually evolve into Atlas Comics and then Marvel Comics. He started with westerns like Kid Colt and Two Gun Kid. And for those of you who remember romance comics, he drew romance comics as well. He did superheroes like the Human Torch and Plastic Man. For those of you who might have seen Mad Magazine in the days it was a comic book, or have had the chance to look at the archives, one of the all-time classics, Plastic Sam, which was a great parody of Plastic Man, was the work of this gentleman. He did horror, mystery, war comics, and apropos to what we were just talking about at our last panel, he worked on one of the very first 3D comic books back in the 1950s with Joe Kubert on tour. He became one of the great cover artists of the 1950s. At DC Comics, he co-created The Haunted Tank, which I loved and relished year after year after year. He made Undersea Adventure come alive with his co-creation of the Sea Devils at DC Comics. He took on Sergeant Rock and had such a great run with Sergeant Rock, probably the greatest war character ever created. And least we forget, he also worked with a few immortals by the name of Harvey Kurtzman and Will Elder on Little Annie Fanny for Playboy, which helped get me through my teenage years, by the way. I'd like to read a quote about this man's work. Along with Joe Kubert, Russ Heath was one of the two defining styles in the DC war comics. His precise and photo-illustrative style was poles apart from Kubert's cinematic approach. Every Heath panel, seemingly each pose, was carefully composed. His talent for illustration may not be surprising. His original career goal was to work in slick magazines. But on top of that, his storytelling was just consistently excellent across his entire career of 50-plus years. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the legends behind the comic books, Mr. Russ Heath. The gentleman immediately to my left was a guy who, whatever comic book I saw his artwork in, that went to the top of my collection. His style was so smooth, it was just so gritty, and his storytelling was so wonderful. And he was known just as much for his inking as he was for his penciling. He started in the golden age of comics. He drew Buck Rogers, the definitive spaceman. At DC Comics, he so defined Hawkman and the Spectre, and Dr. Fate and Hourman, Starman and Black Canary, and the earliest days of Zatanna the Magician. His work could be found on JLA, Flash, the great run of Adam Strange under Julie Schwartz with Carmine Infantino, Superman, where he worked often with Kurt Swan in an amazing duo of talent. His Batman work, I could go on and on. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sitting next to one of the real legends of behind the comic books, Mr. Murphy Anderson. I remember when I was a kid, my dad said, I'm friendly with a guy in town who used to draw comic books. He worked for some guy named Stan Lee. You ever hear of him? It was like, oh my God, there's an artist, a comic book artist in our midst. And then to find out, in the golden age of comics, he drew Captain America and the Submariner and the Human Torch and the Patriot. His work helped define Marvel Comics and make it what it has become today. Along the way, he did a few other things. He worked on All Winners Comics and Marvel Mystery Comics and Young Allies Comics. Worked on a character called the Destroyer, which has been back recently, and I think he died just this week or so in the comics again. But his work has gone on to include Western, war, crime, horror, science fiction. In doing that work, he really helped define Marvel in the era post-Timely and pre-Marvel when it was predominantly known as Atlas. He is a true legend behind the comic books, one of the pillars of Marvel Comics. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Allen Bellman. And I'm going to start, before I get to individual questions, I'd like to ask one question to these three gentlemen. When you were in the trenches working, day to day, did you know, did you realize, did you ever dream that the work you were doing, the works you were drawing, would one day be acknowledged and hanging in museums like the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the Louvre and be considered to be America's modern day mythology?
Or what's the Louvre? What's going on here?
Well, Alan, let me start with you. I happened to be at San Diego Comic-Con when you received an amazing award there and received a 3-minute standing ovation thereafter. What was that like, Alan, after a lifetime working in comics and doing what you did, to hear that applause, to see the fan reaction, and to receive an award like that?
Michael, I never had dreamt or dreamed, any way you want to take that. This would happen to me in my senior year. It's a blessing from God, I tell you. I'm high on a hog right now, I'm top of the world. And I just can't go any further. I get a little choked up because what's happened to me right now is God sent.
Thanks, Alan. Russ, you drew a story in the early 60s, an All-American Men of War. And in the story, you had a wonderful panel that you composed and created and drew of a jet fighter blowing up, and a man by the name of Roy Lichtenstein loved what he saw in your work and decided he would paint a replica of it, which he then sold for millions and millions and millions of dollars in the process of defining this thing called pop art. I would like to know what your thoughts are about that. What of his millions and millions and millions of dollars he turned over to you, and what you think of pop art, and was this a great testimonial to you, or was this identity theft?
Well, I think pop art is a fraud. And it became very stylish at one point with a group of people in New York City, and I think, what's the other one? Lichtenstein and, Andy Warhol, where there's people in it, and I think it's too bad it happened. But it's, nevertheless, it became famous, and half the stuff around it famous, maybe without the degree. And it's, I can relax till he died, I can't get out.
Murphy, What was it like? Recreate for us the feeling of working in the DC bullpen. What was it like? Who was around you? What was your day like? What was the attitude, the feel? What was it like being an artist at DC Comics?
My position at DC was simply that they gave me a space to work, and that was because I wasn't getting my work done at home. And that's about it. But it was a lot of fun working with these guys. They were all good friends, and I got to meet a lot of the fellow artists that I never would have met sitting there working during the day. So it was always very enjoyable too.
Did everybody show up in tie and jacket, or was it very informal?
Oh, there were a few of us, not too many.
Alan, what was it like in the Marvel bullpen going back to the 1940s?
Crazy, man. We had the illustrator's room, which I shared with Mr. Heath. Then there was the animator's room next to us. And I was sitting next to the window, and these animators were crazy as a room, which included Al Chaffee, David Gantz, and a few others. And they did an animated figure, and I look out the window, this little cardboard thing is moving around, and they operating from the other window. They could have fallen out and killed themselves, but I just was amazed that these guys just never took life seriously as the illustrators did. But working in Marvel, there was a story with every artist. And someday maybe they'll put it on TV, because working for Stan Lee, who was a great boss, but there was so much going on in human, I can go on and on. And it just was an amazing office to work in. There was always something going on.
Thanks, Alan. Russ, one of the things you're so famous for are these amazing war comics that you drew. And as I go back and look at them, the intricate detail on the planes and the tanks and the guns and even the clothing, the uniforms, was this deeply researched by you? Was this all out of your imagination? How did you approach it artistically?
Well, my father had been a cowboy before he met my mother, and that was, in those days before television, all the kids on Saturday went to the movies, they come home, they'd see the westerns, they'd come home, play cowboys and Indians and so on. So that's how I got into that.
In terms of the detail that you...
Oh, what had happened was I'm sitting there in the western with my dad, who was a cowboy, and here comes the hero, and he's got an embroidered shirt, with rosebuds and whatnot. And he's no real cowboy would ever think of wearing something like that. So, I wanted people to think I knew what I was talking about. So I wanted to get it right. And the same thing with the war story. You don't want all the GIs to say, this guy's never been near a battle, you can tell, he doesn't know what he's talking about. So I try to get it right, for God's sake, do the research. And I didn't, I might have spent a couple of hours per week. I did all the research the first day, and we had a couple hours, and that was it. But that was enough. And of course, we used to, all the guys that were going to be illustrators had a swipe file. And every time in the magazine you'd see something good, tear it out into the file. And I wonder whatever happened to this. I think it grew moss or something, and that's why I'm like living in the bottom of a wastebasket. Very disconcerting.
Well, Murphy, you're so well known for your inking. What's the difference artistically? How do you approach something differently, penciling and inking? And do artists prefer usually to do their own inking or have someone else ink them?
I always prefer to ink my own pencil. Although on a few occasions I did pencil jokes with Julie Schwartz, but he gave for someone else to ink. at other times when the story was very late, he would clean me up with Joe Gill, for instance, and I'd go over to Joe's house, and Joe would come over to my house, and we'd sit down and knock the stuff out, and later that big story almost overnight. That's just an evening.
Now, Alan, how did you break into the comic book business?
Before I go any further, Michael, do you mind if I say something about you?
Not guilty.
Okay, we didn't get an introduction until Mr. Michael Uslan, the gentleman who has brought back the rights of Batman and Robin, and his latest success was The Dark Knight. So nobody introduced this gentleman. I would like to introduce him now, Mr. Michael Uslan. Your dad had told me, may he rest in peace, at one time, when you went to buy the rights for Batman, I hope you don't mind me saying this, they scoffed at you saying, it's already been done, you know, with Adam West. But you went ahead and against all odds, brought Batman to the screen. And well, what else can I say? It's just been a delight to watch your movies, and I just want to say thank you for also helping me in the past. Thank you. Now, how did I start? Oh, beg your pardon. I'll make it fast. I was all of 18. I was looking through the New York Times. I always wanted to tell pictures, tell a story in pictures. I looked in the New York Times. They were looking for an artist to do backgrounds on Captain America. I said to my dad, I'll go tomorrow because today's Columbus Day. To make it short, I didn't know whether I was a little afraid of rejection but he said, go today. I said, no, Dad, it's a holiday, probably they won't be home. But he said, go today, and you know, behind us there was somebody that gave us that push. It was my father. And I went up and got the job within 5-10 minutes. A fellow by the name, a man of Don Rico, came in, took my work, was gone about 10-15 minutes, said, you hired. That's how I got started.
And Russ, how did you get started in the business?
It was in the summertime, and I was enjoying being at school, and my father thought I should be doing something constructive. And on the train, he met, you meet all kinds of people when you travel every day, and he knew somebody who knew somebody over at Holyoke Publishing, one of the comic outfits in those days, and they did Catman or something like that, books, Captain Arrow, and so on. So I went over there, and they gave me a script, and so I did it, and I also had to learn. I thought it was all done in pen and ink, and I found it was brush and ink. So he hands me a brush, probably number 3, Winter Newton. Number 2. Wasn't necessary for that small.
Well, let's brush it off.
No, I was lazier. See, I could hold more liquid and go longer. And that's what it gets me. Some of the kids today, they think get a 0 or get a 1 to make a very fine line. The point is the same point. If it's a huge brush, it has a couple of ink in it. It's the point of the brush that matters, not how many hairs are in it. And where was it?
Do you remember where you were paid for your first job?
No, I don't. I have no idea. I remember I bought my first own purchase of a wristwatch. That's the first. I remember it was like $50 or something. And I used it in one of the covers. I have guy being held underwater, and I thought, nobody likes to see their watch underwater, so I put the smile on. I added a couple of lobsters just for that. In New York, sure. You know.
Murphy, how did you get started in the business, and do you remember what you were paid initially for Page?
I wasn't paid for Page, I was paid for they gave me a job to fix the house. I walked the streets in New York for about a week, calling on every publisher I could think of. And I finally wound up with a guy named Harry.
What company?
He gave me a tip to pick up the phone and called an outfit called Fiction House. And they told him that they were send me up to the office. So that was Friday morning, and Friday noon, I was at a job. I worked for Fiction House, and I started at $35 a week.
35 a week. Who said you can't make a lot of money in the comic book industry? Murphy, what about, people talk about the unexplored uses of comic books in education, and that comic books are an effective tool to educate. I know you've been at the forefront of that. Could you talk about your PS magazine experience and how effective it is to educate?
PS magazine was a magazine conceived of and sold to the Army by Will Eisner. And Will was the original contractor and contracted the magazine for I think like 20 years. And finally, I guess he got tired, and it wound up in my hands. Because I had worked for Will for about 2 years towards the end of my comic book career. I realized comic books weren't going anywhere. I seemed to think that. And I wanted to get something a little more useful under my belt. So PS was perhaps the thing I got the most satisfaction out of doing in my entire career. PS magazine was a magazine, a little digest-sized magazine published monthly by the Army, and it went in mostly to motor pools and the guys actually operating and fixing, repairing their equipment. Although they always covered anything to go to the Army only, anything from typewriters to helicopters. But I got great satisfaction out of that because I went out in the field with a writer and the editor on occasion, and we'd call on people I got a feel for what the magazine was really doing. And it's just wonderful how much the magazine was appreciated by the regular soldier. And as I say, that was the most satisfying work I did.
So that's great. There's a lot of innovation that has been done over the years by these gentlemen. Russ, you worked on one of the first 3D comic books with Joe Kubert, Norm Maurer.
It was 3D.
Yeah. What was that like? How different was that approaching it as an artist?
Well, it was a pretty complicated thing, the first few of them. And one of the things that went wrong, why they didn't continue, was everybody tried to jump on the bandwagon and they figured, we'll make a ton on every issue of money. And so they had the glasses, which had an orange red on one side and the blue-green on the other, and they would cancel out, and they only printed in those two colors. Well, in their rush to gobble the money up, they ran out of colored cellophane, so they started dyeing the cellophane. We just stopped being very pure about the business. And so half the time, you'd get double image, and your eyes were sore after 20 minutes of this, your eye trying to correct for what it wasn't there. So a lot of them, it just didn't function and fell to pieces. So it was a quick run, and it's like make $1 million and get out.
And now movies and animation are so 3D centered and it's become the hot new thing all over again. It's going to be interesting to see how this impacts the comic book industry per the last panel that we just had here, talk about that. Alan, who, besides yourself, was the most talented artist you ever worked with in your career? Who more than anyone do you think had it?
Well, there was a gentleman called Mike Sikowski who worked in the same room as myself. He had a terrible attitude on life, but he was a damn good artist. He'd sit back all day like this, and yet his work got done. How the hell did he do it? Mean as a snake. Especially, well, I shouldn't talk about the deceased, but Mike sat right next to a young lady called Violet Barkley, who recently passed on. And next to her was George Klein, a real well-dressed gentleman, playboy type, handsome guy. And there was something going on, Mike Sikowski, as it was the boyfriend, girlfriend of Violet Barkley, and George Klein somehow got close to Violet Barkley, and that didn't make Mike Sikowski feel so good. So there was, like I say, there may be 1,000 bulbs on Broadway for Broken Heart. But I'll tell you, there was a million comic books for what happened in Timely Office.
Russ, who was the greatest artist you ever knew working in the comic book field? Who do you think was the greatest? Yeah.
I don't know that I ever worked with any. Mostly, I started out in the bullpen at Timely, and then after a month or two, Stan says, you know, you can take it home and do it. You don't have to come in and do it. So, I thought it was great, and until I got married. And it's like, you know, you've got it all in your head. You know, you've been working an hour and a half, and you're thinking ahead and what you're going to do in that part and what you're going to do there. And your wife says, honey, I forgot to bring the soap upstairs. So it only takes a second. And it didn't take more than 25 seconds to 30 to throw the soap. I sat down and where was I? It'd take a half an hour to build that stage back, you know, and then something else. You know. So I spent most of 7-day weeks, of course, stopping for lunch now and then, taking the kids out for hamburgers or something. But I worked, you know, a big part of every day of the week to keep up. And I didn't have near as much freedom as Mr. Average Man might have.
And of all the artists out there, who was your favorite? Who was your personal favorite? Was Hertzman, Elder, Kubert?
I think it was Foster, because Foster, he had a big advantage over everybody else because he only had one page to do per week. So he could spend a day and a half on each panel doing a regular illustration. And
This is Hal Foster for Prince Valiant? Hal Foster, Prince Valiant?
yeah, Hal Foster was Prince Valiant and Tarzan before that. I had been cutting out all the Tarzans and saving them. And then somebody, you know, cleaning up threw them away. And but the Prince Valiants, I think, were his better period of art. The Tarzans actually were a hangover from earlier comics where everybody was the same size, just walking through the panels on the same floor. I mean, and he started doing regular illustration, you know, one out in the country, and next leaning on your elbow, you know, the way it ought to be. And he went through, I think he did his finest work in Prince Valiant. Not at the very beginning, but after that he climbed up a great deal. And while it might be a little sterile in some instances, and he did have a few flaws. I think one of them was that if you had a foreshorten, like you're looking at my arm, and that to you is to be, if you're going to draw it, has to be foreshortened. And sometimes it looked like the arm was 4 inches long. You know? Or maybe I was the only guy that thought so.
Murphy, what artist did you admire the most?
You qualified as any artist in the beginning with comic books. There's no doubt in my mind. The biggest influence on the industry was Will Eisner. Also, it started years later when he started, since he was in the Army, he had done a lot of work for the Army's preventive maintenance. He got the idea for PS Navy. He sold it to the Army, and after some 20 years, he put most of the work himself, and most of the lead characters all had that. Maybe you'd only do that one after a day, some figure. But anyhow, he made that possible and became a great success of the Army. Was Captain Ledger. But as fate would have it, I decided to get out of comic books more or less, except for a couple of things with Julie, and I applied for a job when I heard that Will was looking for an assistant. So I took the job with Will, and the rest for me was history. I worked for Will for about 2.5 years, and Will, shortly after I left to go back into comics for certain reasons, he decided to start farming out the magazine. He had his shop moved across the street, and ultimately he dropped the PS contract. And since I'd worked with Will on the magazine, certain people in the magazine's staff encouraged me to make a bid. And I did, and actually got the contract. And so for some 12 years I worked on PS Magazine, except before, with a great thing from my satisfying book.
Boy, what's going on over there? Is that a hair salon?
They're playing some games over there. We'll talk over them. Allen, you left comics at a certain time. Was that part of the industry coming under attack, Frederick Worth and the seduction of the innocent? Why did you leave comics ultimately?
Why did I leave comics? Or should I say, why did it leave me? Yeah, this nutty professor, you might say, he brought down the comic book industry almost to a halt. Frankly, I didn't pay heed to what he was saying. It couldn't happen here, you know, but it did happen here. In fact, Stanley was already packing up to leave. Timely, Mao was ready to close up, and suddenly something happened. But I just met my new wife. Well, she wasn't my wife at the time, and nothing dependable to look forward to as far as making a living. So what did I do? I went into business, and took me halfway around the world, bought all my camera equipment, and worked out. But you know, when you're in business for yourself, you always got a buck in your pocket. Working for comics at that time, even though, you know, things were cheaper than they are today, it was still a little hard. Artists were looked at, spat at. They had no respect. But today, thank God, it's a different outlook. We've come back, and I'm so proud to be sitting with three of the greatest people in the comic book industry and the movie industry. And my hat's off to Mr. Russ Heath, Mr. Murphy Anderson, and of course, Mr. Michael Uslan.
Thank you, Alan. All right, we're gonna throw this open to some Q&A. These gentlemen represent just so many major characters over the years. They've worked with so many major artists, writers, and editors, and all the major comic book companies and some minor ones. So the questions can run the gamut. Let's start right over here. What were your favorite characters to draw? We'll start with Murphy, and then Russ, and then Alan.
Oh, and DC comic books, I guess I would have to pick Hulkman, my favorite vehicle. And close up will be the Atomic Knights, which I helped create.
And by the way, there's a new Atomic Knights trade paperback that came out very recently that collects all of the wonderful ones Murphy did. Russ, what was your favorite character to work on?
I don't know that I've ever thought of them in that line as to who I liked more than the other one. I think I probably was into a job for the length of that job, and then the next week it was something else, and I started a new interest in, you do a story about somebody killing his family because he knew that the bomb was going to be dropped, and he wanted to see they didn't die terribly, so he was doing it one at a time at home, and entirely different than anything else I ever did. And then I had one where they had vampires, and I had never heard of silver bullets, and here's the Lone Ranger with silver bullets. So I had the story ends up the Lone Ranger comes and I thought, how perfect, and entirely different than what I'd done in books before. And I was very fortunate that at Warren they gave me 3 scripts each time, and I read them and picked one that I thought appealed to me personally. And sometimes it was just the twist ending and I freaked out on it. There was one that was an African story, and there's this boy who's not quite a man yet in the tribe, and then all the hunters go out and they come back and they raid the village next door, and they come back with prisoners and whoever they caught. And there's this one gorgeous 15-year-old, and he just, his mouth starts watering, and he just, goes crazy. And they say, well, you have to kill a lion. So the story, he goes out and he somehow manages to kill a lion, and he comes back and he's on everybody's shoulders, and they're and the girl is in this hut, and he's to go in, and you're thinking romance. And they were cannibals, and he wanted to put her on a spit and eat it.
There you go. Alan, your favorite character to work on?
Well, I created a character feature called Let's Play Detective, which is now featured in All Winners 3 hardcover book from Marvel. It stars Detective Mike Trapp and his sidekick Pepper Burns. I was speaking to somebody at Marvel Comics, and since Disney took it over, I said, boy, that would make a great television program where the family sits together to solve a mystery, a clean mystery movie. And I haven't heard anything yet, but I still have hopes to see that on a tube. Well, it's not the tube anymore, on a flat screen. In fact, I went to my doctor the other day. They still have the old television set, and I said to the girl, I want to make a donation so you guys can buy a new television set. I mean, these guys are so cheap. But anyway.
That's news and a comment.
But this Let's Play Detective threw pretty popular because I received one fan letter. No, I believe in that feature as a family program. The family sits together, solves a mystery together. Hope that God stays together.
That's great. Next, yes, sir. How they were influenced by the comic strips and the comic strip artists. Yeah, Rick, who was your biggest influence in terms of the great comic strip artists? Kniff, Alex Raymond, who was your greatest influence? We'll start with Russ.
Of course, each one, as much as they seem to be alike, were quite different than each other. Milton Kniff started out doing a very cartoony thing. Dickie Dare was originally his thing, and so he did a big changeover in his work with the influence of Noel Sickles, who was an illustrator, and sort of came up with a formula way to work that worked very good in comics. But then there was Flash Gordon. Flash Gordon seemed to me like everybody was posed, and they weren't doing the best actions for the story line. I mean, they're kind of draped around. You can imagine him draping the gals in the room, and it looked like that. And it should have looked like where the story was supposed to be going. And so each one had their own thing. I mean, he was a fabulous illustrator, more of an illustrator than Kniff. Not to put Kniff down or anything, because he was obviously one of the great storytelling, unbelievable. His stuff was better than the B movies that were going on all the time. And let's see, who else? There were a couple of very good men around.
Would Roy Crane be one of them?
Yes. Roy Crane was very cartoony, but he made it up in the scenery, and he used craft tints, a lot of grays, and he was a master at that. And I remember copying some of that. And Barney Baxter was one of the cross-hatching themes of the world, which is where I guess I got some of that. And John Severin and I both.
Murphy, who is your biggest influence? What artist from the comic strips?
I don't think there's any one that overshadowed the other, but the usual guys like the Foster and Raymond and Kniff. Of the three, Kniff was the one that couldn't really quite grasp. So I went into the realistic one.
And from the comic books, would your greatest influence be Lou Fine, or?
So then the comic books, my favorite artist at that time were Lou Fine and Will Eisner. Between the two of them, I thought they were. And I don't think many people would refute or disagree with my feelings that Will Eisner was the greatest single influence on comics. So I learned an awful lot from Will, not just for his drawing, but also his storytelling and his concept, his way of making the pages interesting. They weren't just a flat old breakdown of 6 and 9.
I agree. I think Will Eisner was the greatest graphic storyteller in the history of comics. Alan, who was your greatest influence? What artist in comic strips?
Milton Kniff was the god to all the arts, practically every artist. I was in junior high school. I created a club called National Amateur Cartoon Society. We put out a little paper, Milton Kniff. I was corresponding with Milton Kniff Boy, the greatest adventure of my life was getting a letter from him. It was on pink stationery and in gray lettering, said Terry, Milton Caniff, and then I'm the Pirates. And he wrote an article for the paper, and he said in that little article, and to get to the point, was that he said, if you want to do a more successful comic strip, look around, see what's selling in the movies and so forth all around you, and just go on out those lines. But I used to sleep, eat, and dream about Milton Caniff. I saved every one of his strips and put them in a scrapbook. He was a storyteller. His dialogue was great. His drawing was great. His characters, not realistic as the art of Alexander Raymond and Flash Gordon, but he was the greatest. God rest his soul.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, you are lucky enough, you will have an opportunity to take pictures of these gentlemen. You will have an opportunity, they're signing out there, they have sketches, and you'll have an opportunity, if you'd like to have them draw something for you as well. Stop by and see them, and take a look at the sketches that they're doing. They're really, really amazing. They've given us our hobby. They've given us our passion. They have laid the groundwork, the foundation for the thing that most of us here enjoy so, so much. And it's only fitting that we give them Cincinnati's greatest appreciation for their role as legends behind the comic books. Ladies and gentlemen, Allen Bellman, Russ Heath, and Murphy Anderson.
Could we go home now?